Hi everyone, this is Mary Quest, and the professional development proposal that I am presenting centers on the research that I have been doing about action research and the research question that I am interested in. So the proposal is actually intended to examine both providing the professional development in an area that is of interest and useful to early childhood educators, but also could serve as a means of studying this question. And the question is there a connection between the process of action research and teacher dispositions? The connections that I have been making so far in the research are between reflective teaching and action research. And reflective teaching is important in the action research process, both for identifying the topic of inquiry, but also in embracing the idea of change, changing something about teaching practice. Barbara Larravee identifies different levels of reflection, including surface, pedagogical, critical, and self-reflection. At the surface reflection level, and even to some extent at the pedagogical level, the ultimate goal is to maintain order, the routine, maintain the status quo in the classroom. At the pedagogical level, it's a focus on whether children are developing or learning and thinking about ways that content might be delivered or development might be supported. When you think about teaching that is responsive to the context and to relationships, then it must involve critical or self-reflection levels, as the goal at these levels involves change or growth. These levels consider deeper issues beyond whether the classroom is running smoothly, and getting at the lasting impact and implications of learning and the school experience itself, and social and cultural considerations. Reflective teaching doesn't always involve action research, but if evidence of improved student outcomes is indeed a factor in real change in teacher practice, beliefs, and values, as Guskey pointed out in the reading from last week, then a systematic collection of data and communication of results of action research, which are those aspects of action research that set it apart from reflective teaching, then that would better support teacher development and change. So what is action research? What does it involve? I'm going to very briefly go over a few points about action research. Henderson, Meyer, Perry, and Stremmel in a NAEYC publication, Our Inquiry, Our Practice, introduced the idea that action research involves questions of relevance that are posed by a teacher with the main goal of understanding teaching and learning in the context of the classroom. It involves forming a question, collecting data, analyzing the data, and forming conclusions. Stremmel identifies aspects of action research that indicate quality, and those involve things like systematically and carefully documenting the data, using multiple approaches to inquiry, either multiple sources of data and or multiple approaches to data analysis. That the action research must relate to a relevant problem that has a legitimate call for action. The action research must be credible and dependable in order for it to be applicable to other practitioners. The approach and methods must be transparent so as to confirm absence of bias. In the next few slides, I'm going to identify a few points that are part of a rationale for why it would be important to pursue a professional development series on action research. If we are buying into the idea of social constructivism as part of our philosophy of teaching, and we understand that constructivism involves inquiry-based learning, then the process of action research really gives teachers the opportunity for something like parallel processing. It would help them to better understand the learner perspective within that inquiry process. It also supports the ideas that the learner is central to education and that the learner is an active participant in their own development and learning, which certainly we learned about in HD1, and I think is also something that has come up in this course with Working for Adults, that people need to actively participate in their own development and learning. And thinking about it from the Reggio Emilia approach perspective, inquiry and research are both integral to the process of education from the Reggio Emilia perspective. Teachers and children in Reggio Emilia are considered co-researchers. And in the Reggio perspective, theory and practice are redefined as reciprocal to each other, rather than practice being a consequence of theory. So if theory is that, theory, and not fact, then really teachers are in the best position to help contribute to the growing depth of understanding of theory through practice, and what practice can contribute to theory. This quote from Carlina Rinaldi also mentions documentation, which in the Reggio perspective, again, is not something that just happens at the end, but is part of the whole process of theory and practice as reciprocal. If we are considering social constructivist philosophy and inquiry-based learning as relevant for the children in the classroom, then engaging in the process as teachers offers a window into the power of that experience. And if we're thinking in terms of effective professional development, and this is a slide from the presentation from last week from class, and we think about Guskey's alternative model to professional development, then action research actually follows that same pattern, that same process. The change in teacher attitudes or beliefs would come from actually conducting the action research and documenting the student outcomes and seeing change happen, which then promotes changes in teachers' beliefs and attitudes and continued change in practice. So as I am presenting this professional development series on action research, I have two sort of overarching goals, one for teachers and one for researchers or for myself. The first being to help teachers engage in and understand and access the processes that reflective teaching and action research are about. And the second, to have an opportunity to research whether there is a connection between the process of action research and positive teacher dispositions. So I'm going to attach a document that has more specific objectives for the series, the evaluation strategies that would be included, and a very brief outline of activities that might happen over the span of a school year. And I'm also going to post a couple of discussion questions that I have, and I would love some feedback, some insights from all of you to help think about aspects of this that I haven't considered, to think about which particular dispositions might be most affected by engaging in the process of action research. Thanks.